Victoria Ashford noticed it after the quarterly board meeting concluded. Her daughter Clara's math homework had been left open on the conference table. The problems were supposed to be simple addition exercises. Instead, someone had filled the margins with advanced calculus concepts, explained through intricate drawings of butterflies and stars. "Who helped you with this?" Victoria inquired that evening, her voice carefully maintaining a neutral tone. "The janitor, Mommy," Clara replied. "He said numbers tell stories." Victoria had seen him around before, quiet, methodical, always present after everyone else had left for the day. A man who moved through the building like a silent shadow, offering a polite nod but never initiating conversation. But tonight, as she observed him through her office window while he cleaned the research lab, she detected something peculiar. He wasn't merely wiping down surfaces. He was intently reading the documents left scattered on the desks, his eyes scanning each page with a focused intensity that caused her chest to tighten. "Did he teach you anything else?" she asked. Clara looked up from her coloring crayons. "He told me smart people ask questions," she said, "and that the biggest secrets often hide in the smallest places." The coffee in Victoria's hand had turned cold an hour earlier, but she remained rooted to her desk. The employee file for Daniel Wright lay open before her, and the more she scrutinized it, the less sense it seemed to make. It contained only 3 lines of information. No emergency contact listed, a mailing address that turned out to be a UPS store in downtown Boston, and a start date from 6 months ago that coincided almost exactly with the week of her father's passing. She accessed the security footage again, scrolling back through weeks of late-night recordings. There he was, night after night, pushing his cleaning cart through the deserted hallways. But every few nights he would pause, stopping in front of certain doors, the research lab, the archive room, and her father's old office, which she had kept locked ever since his funeral. Victoria's phone buzzed. A text message from her head of research, Dr. Nora Bennett. "Need to talk. Found something strange in the trial data." The fluorescent lights in the research lab bathed everything in a stark, unforgiving white glow. Dr. Bennett stood at the main computer terminal, her fingers drumming against the desk in that characteristic way she did when she felt nervous. She'd been a valued member of Ashford Pharmaceuticals for 12 years, having worked directly under Victoria's father on the cancer drug trials that had propelled the company to its current prominence. "What is it?" Victoria asked, setting her briefcase down on the floor. Nora pulled up a series of documents on the screen. "I was conducting routine audits of our historical files, standard compliance protocol, but I discovered discrepancies in the Phase 2 trials from 15 years ago, the ones your father oversaw." Victoria felt a chill settle in her stomach. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Patient numbers don't match. We reported 73 participants in the trial, but the raw data shows 89. Nora's voice dropped to a hushed tone. "That means 16 people were never officially enrolled, never gave consent, and 7 of them died." The room seemed to tilt ever so slightly. Victoria gripped the edge of the desk for support. "That's impossible. Those trials built our reputation. The FDA approved everything. Someone cleaned the files very professionally, but they overlooked the backup logs." Nora turned to face her directly. "Victoria, if this gets out, it's not just lawsuits we're facing. It's criminal charges. The company will collapse." Victoria's mind raced, processing the potential implications, recalling memories of her father in this very lab, his unwavering passion for saving lives, for making groundbreaking discoveries. Thomas Ashford had been a visionary, everyone agreed. He had built this company from the ground up, dedicating his entire life to helping people in need. This had to be a mistake, some form of data corruption. "Who else knows about this?" Victoria asked. "Just me for now." Nora hesitated briefly. "But someone's been accessing these files. 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, last Thursday, always after midnight, and always from a terminal within the building." "Show me the login credentials." Nora clicked through several screens. "That's the strange part. There aren't any. Whoever it was bypassed the security system entirely. They knew exactly what they were looking for and precisely how to find it." Victoria's thoughts turned to Daniel Wright, standing motionless in front of locked doors, reading documents he shouldn't be able to comprehend, teaching her daughter mathematics that seemed impossibly advanced for a janitor. "Pull up the security footage for those dates. I want to see who was in the building." They watched in silence as the grainy footage played. 11:47 p.m. on the first date. The research lab door opened. A figure entered, moving directly to the computer terminal. The angle made it impossible to see the face clearly, but Victoria recognized the maintenance uniform, the blue shirt bearing the Ashford Pharmaceuticals logo, the same uniform that Daniel Wright wore every night. "I want a full background check," Victoria said quietly. "Not the basic one HR does, the real kind. Every job, every school, every address for the last 20 years. Nora nodded slowly. "Victoria, there's something else. The files that were accessed, they weren't just viewed. Copies were made, sent somewhere external. If someone's building a case against us, then we need to know who they are and what they want." Victoria picked up her briefcase. "Don't discuss this with anyone. I'll handle it." But handling it meant confronting the man who had shown kindness to her daughter, the man who had taught Clara to appreciate the beauty of numbers, who had made her laugh with stories about imaginary worlds where equations came alive. Victoria had once observed them together through the glass wall of the conference room, and she had felt grateful that someone recognized how special her daughter was. Now she wondered what else he saw, what else he knew, and why he had chosen to hide in plain sight within her company. The house felt unusually quiet that night. Clara was already asleep, her homework spread across the kitchen table, along with a colorful array of pencils. Victoria picked up the math worksheet, studying the careful notes scribbled in the margins. The handwriting was precise, patient, breaking down complex concepts into simple, accessible analogies. This wasn't someone merely feigning understanding. This was someone who possessed such a profound grasp of the subject matter that they could render it beautiful. She opened her laptop and typed Daniel Wright's name into every search engine, every database to which she had access. Nothing immediately useful appeared. But when she tried Daniel Wright MIT, something flickered briefly. A cached page from 15 years ago. A faculty directory. Dr. Daniel Wright, Associate Professor of Biochemistry, specializing in oncological pharmacology. The photograph was grainy, but it was undoubtedly him, younger, wearing a suit instead of a janitor's uniform, standing in front of a chalkboard covered in intricate molecular structures. The bio mentioned his groundbreaking work on cellular regeneration and his collaboration with numerous pharmaceutical companies, including Ashford Pharmaceuticals. Victoria's hands began to tremble as she clicked through archived news articles. Promising researcher leaves academic post. and Daniel Wright resigns amid personal tragedy. And then, 3 years later, former MIT professor files lawsuit against major pharmaceutical company. Case dismissed. She located the court documents buried deep within the public records. Wright versus Ashford Pharmaceuticals, filed 14 years ago, dismissed due to lack of standing. But the initial complaint was there, and as Victoria read it, she felt the very foundations of her understanding begin to crumble. Wright's wife, Eleanor, had enrolled in an experimental trial at a facility connected to Ashford, a trial for early-stage cancer patients. She had been assured that it was FDA-approved, fully vetted, and safe. But the drug dosages were experimental, higher than what was legally permissible. And when she began to exhibit adverse reactions, instead of removing her from the study, they had increased the dosage. Eleanor Wright had died in that hospital, and according to the complaint, so had 6 other participants, all of them homeless or without families, all of them desperate enough to sign anything in exchange for the promise of free medical care, and all of them erased from the official records. The case had been dismissed because Wright couldn't prove that his wife had ever been in the trial. The hospital records showed that she had never been admitted. The trial log showed that she had never enrolled. Even her death certificate listed a different cause of death, something unrelated to the experimental drugs. Someone had made Elena Wright disappear. Someone with the power and financial resources to erase official documents. Someone like Thomas Ashford. Victoria closed the laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights blurred into a shimmering constellation of white and gold. Her father had built this company to save lives. That's what he had always told her. Every decision, every risk he took, was about helping people who had no other options. He had been utterly devoted to that mission, working himself to exhaustion in its pursuit. But what if the mission had become more important than the people themselves? What if saving thousands in the future had justified sacrificing a few in the present? What if her father had convinced himself that the ends justified the means? And what if Daniel Wright had spent 15 years searching for proof, had lost everything, his career, his reputation, his entire life, all to expose a truth that no one wanted to believe? Victoria thought about Clara asleep upstairs, about the way Daniel had looked at her daughter with such profound gentleness. He could have harmed them, could have used Clara to manipulate Victoria to exact his revenge. Instead, he had taught her mathematics, made her feel intelligent and valued. Why would someone seeking revenge show such kindness to the daughter of his enemy? The next morning, Victoria arrived at the office an hour before anyone else. She went directly to the archive room, using her master key to unlock the cabinet where her father's personal files were stored. She had gone through these boxes after his death, sifting through decades of research notes and correspondence. But she hadn't been searching for anything incriminating. She had been grieving. Now she searched with a different perspective. And in the bottom of the third box, beneath stacks of technical papers, she found a leather-bound journal. Her father's handwriting filled the pages, not research notes, something else, something more personal. The trial is showing promise, but we're losing patients at an unacceptable rate. Standard protocols would require us to halt, but we're so close to a breakthrough. If we can adjust the dosage, find the right balance, we could save millions. The IRB won't approve higher doses, so we'll have to find another way. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. She flipped forward, her hands trembling. We've identified suitable candidates through the outreach program, homeless population, terminally ill, no family connections. They'll sign anything for medical care, legally questionable but morally justified. We're offering them a chance at life while advancing research that will benefit humanity. Thomas Hammond at the clinic is coordinating. No official records, cash payments to participants. She wanted to stop reading, wanted to close the journal and pretend that she had never opened it. But she continued, turning page after page, witnessing her father's rationalizations, his unwavering conviction that he was doing the right thing, his frustration when people died, yes, but also his relentless determination to push forward, to refine the process, to achieve success. Lost another one today. Elena Wright. Daniel is asking questions, demanding to see trial records. Had to have Hammond clean the files. Daniel's becoming a problem. His wife signed the consent forms, but he'll claim she didn't understand what she was agreeing to. Need to handle this carefully. The work is too important. Victoria pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back a wave of nausea. Her father had known Daniel's wife personally. He had known Daniel, and he had let her die anyway. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before her father's death. Daniel Wright has filed a lawsuit. Hammond says we can make it disappear. No official records means no proof. Daniel will look like a grieving spouse creating conspiracy theories. Feel guilty about this, but the research has saved thousands since then. Eleanor's death, tragic as it was, contributed to a greater good. Have to believe that. Victoria closed the journal carefully, as if it might shatter in her hands. She thought about her father's funeral, about the hundreds of people who had come to pay their respects, scientists whose research he had funded, patients whose lives the company's drugs had saved, politicians who praised his philanthropy. Everyone celebrating Thomas Ashford, the visionary who had transformed medicine. No one had mentioned the people who had died to make those advancements possible, the invisible ones, the ones without families to ask questions or the financial resources to demand answers. She found Daniel Wright in the basement supply room, restocking cleaning solutions. He looked up as she entered, and she saw recognition in his eyes. Not surprise. He had been expecting this. "You know," Victoria said, making it a statement rather than a question. Daniel set down the bottle he was holding. His hands were steady. "I know." "How long have you been planning this?" 15 years. His voice was quiet, matter-of-fact. "At first, I just wanted proof that Eleanor was real, that she hadn't been erased. Then I wanted justice. Then I just wanted people to know the truth." "So you came here, pretended to be a janitor, gained access to the building." Victoria's voice was sharper than she intended. "Used my daughter." Something flickered across Daniel's face. Pain, perhaps. "I never used Clara Ara. I taught her math because she was sitting alone in a conference room, looking sad, because she reminded me of the daughter Eleanor and I never got to have, because she's a bright kid who deserves to understand that she's smart. While you were planning to destroy her mother's company, while I was documenting crimes that your father committed." Daniel's voice remained level, but there was an underlying steel in it. 7 people died, Victoria. 7 that I can prove, probably more. They were people. They had names. Elena had dreams. She wanted to be a teacher. She loved mystery novels and terrible reality TV, and she made the best blueberry pancakes I've ever tasted. She was real. Victoria felt tears welling up, but she refused to let them fall. "I found my father's journal. I know what he did." "Do you?" Daniel took a step closer. Because it's easy to know something in theory. It's different to truly understand it. Your father convinced himself he was a hero, that the ends justified the means, that some lives matter less than others. I'm not my father. No. Daniel studied her face. You're not? Thomas Ashford never would have come down here to confront me. He would have had security remove me, had lawyers bury me, had every resource of this company deployed to protect his reputation. You're here because you want to know the truth. That's different. What do you want? Victoria asked. Revenge? Money? To watch the company collapse? I want people to know what happened. I want Eleanor's name on an official record somewhere. I want the other families to know that their loved ones didn't just disappear. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. I want to stop having nightmares about her dying alone in a hospital bed, calling for me while doctors I trusted injected her with poison. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang. Normal sounds of a normal day, except nothing would ever be normal again. If I help you, Victoria said slowly, if I acknowledge what my father did, the company will be destroyed. Lawsuits, criminal investigations, bankruptcy, hundreds of people will lose their jobs. Research projects that are helping people will shut down. I know Clara will grow up knowing that her grandfather was a criminal, that her mother runs a company built on murder. I know that too. Daniel's expression softened. I've thought about this for 15 years, Victoria. Every possible outcome, every consequence. And I keep coming back to the same question. If we let these things stay buried, if we decide that truth matters less than comfort, what are we teaching the next generation? Victoria thought about Clara upstairs, about the math homework with butterflies in the margins, about the man who had taught her daughter that smart people ask questions, that secrets hide in the smallest places. What did you tell her? Victoria asked. When you were teaching her, what did you really tell her? I told her that math is about finding patterns, about looking at something that seems random and discovering the order underneath, about how sometimes the answer isn't what you expect, but that doesn't make it wrong. Daniel smiled sadly. I told her that her mother is the kind of person who solves hard problems, who doesn't give up when things get difficult. You were testing me, all of it. The homework, the security footage, making sure I'd find out who you were. You wanted to see what I'd do. I wanted to give you a choice. Daniel picked up his cleaning supplies. Your father never gave Eleanor one. She trusted doctors who told her she'd be safe. She signed forms she didn't fully understand. She believed in people who saw her as expendable. I wanted to know if you were different. Victoria watched him prepare to leave, to return to mopping floors and emptying trash bins. A man with a doctorate from MIT pushing a janitor's cart because it was the only way to get close enough to the truth. How many nights had he spent reading files, copying data, building his case? How many times had he been tempted to give up? The files you copied, she said, you've already sent them somewhere, to a journalist, someone I trust. But I told her to wait, to give me time to see if there was another way. Daniel met her eyes. I don't want to destroy what your father built. The legitimate research, the drugs that really do help people. But I won't let what happened to Elena stay buried either. How much time do I have? As much as you need. I've waited 15 years. I can wait a little longer. After Daniel left, Victoria stood alone in the supply room, surrounded by bottles of disinfectant and boxes of paper towels. The mundane supplies of a janitorial job, the disguise of a man who had lost everything to expose a truth that no one wanted to hear. She thought about her father, about the journal upstairs full of rationalizations and justifications, about how easy it must have been to slide from wanting to help people to deciding which people deserved help, about how the greatest crimes often originated from people who believed they were doing good. And she thought about Clara, who had learned from a janitor that the biggest secrets hide in the smallest places, that numbers tell stories, that smart people ask questions. Victoria pulled out her phone and called Dr. Bennett. "Set up a meeting with the board, all of them, for tomorrow morning." Her voice was steady now, resolute. "And contact our legal team. Tell them we need experts in voluntary disclosure and corporate responsibility. We're going to need them." "Victoria, what are you doing?" "Something my father should have done 15 years ago." The board meeting the next morning was exactly as chaotic as Victoria had anticipated. 12 senior executives seated around a conference table, all staring at her as if she had announced plans to burn down the building, which, in a sense, she had. "You want to do what?" Richard Brennan, the CFO, looked as if he might be having a heart attack. His face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "Voluntary disclosure," Victoria repeated calmly. "We acknowledge the illegal trials from 15 years ago. We cooperate fully with federal investigators. We establish a victims' fund for affected families, and we implement new protocols to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again." "That's corporate suicide," Margaret Kwan, the head of legal, said flatly. "The lawsuits alone will bankrupt us, not to mention the criminal charges." "Victoria, I understand you're upset about your father's actions, but my father killed people." Victoria's voice cut through the room like ice. "He conducted illegal medical experiments on vulnerable populations. He falsified records and destroyed evidence. And then he built a company on top of those crimes. That's not something to be upset about. That's something to be prosecuted for." "He's dead," Richard pointed out. "You can't prosecute a dead man, but you can destroy the livelihoods of everyone in this room, everyone in this building. Is that what you want?" Victoria looked around the table. Some faces reflected anger, others fear, and a few showed a hint of relief, as if they had been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. "I want to run a company I'm not ashamed of. I want my daughter to grow up knowing that when faced with a difficult choice, her mother chose the truth." "Very noble," Richard said coldly, "and very expensive. The shareholders will vote you out before lunch." "Maybe." Victoria opened the folder in front of her. "But before they do, they should know that the evidence has already been compiled. Names, dates, patient records, financial transfers. If we don't disclose voluntarily, someone else will do it for us, and then we won't get any credit for cooperation. We'll just look like criminals who got caught." The room fell silent. Margaret leaned forward, her expression sharp. "Who has this evidence? Does it matter?" Victoria met her gaze directly. "The point is, the truth is coming out one way or another. We can get ahead of it, or we can wait for it to destroy us. Those are the only two options." Dr. Bennett spoke up from the end of the table. She had remained quiet until now, but her voice carried significant weight. "For what it's worth, I think Victoria is right. I've been reviewing our current protocols, and there are gaps, places where the pressure to produce results could lead to ethical shortcuts. If we're serious about preventing this from happening again, we need more than just new policies. We need a fundamental culture change." "Culture change doesn't pay settlements," Richard muttered. "No." but it might help us survive them. Margaret was making notes on her legal pad now, her practical instincts taking over. If we control the narrative, cooperate fully, show genuine remorse, and implement concrete changes, we might be able to limit the damage. It's still going to be bad. Class action suits, probably some individual criminal exposure for people who helped Thomas cover it up. But if we handle this right, the company itself might survive. Might, Richard repeated bitterly. It's better than definitely won't, Victoria said, which is what happens if we try to hide this and fail. The vote wasn't unanimous. 3 board members resigned on the spot rather than be associated with the voluntary disclosure of corporate crimes. But 9 voted yes. 9 people who decided that the truth mattered more than convenience. After the meeting, Victoria found Daniel Wright in the parking garage, loading his cleaning cart into his beat-up Honda. He looked up as she approached, questions evident in his eyes. "We're going public," she said without preamble. "Full disclosure. The board voted yes this morning." Daniel's hand froze on the cart handle. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, very quietly, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Victoria hugged her arms around herself. The parking garage felt cold, or maybe she was simply exhausted. "I have a daughter who thinks I can solve hard problems. I need to prove to her that she's right." "Eleanor would have liked you," Daniel said softly. "She believed in accountability, in people being brave enough to admit their mistakes." "I'm not brave. I'm terrified." Victoria's voice cracked. "This is going to be a nightmare. Lawyers, journalists, angry families with every right to be furious. The company might not survive. But you'll be able to look your daughter in the eye." Daniel locked his car and turned to face her fully. "That's worth something." "Is it enough for you?" Daniel remained silent for a long while. Then he finally spoke. "Eleanor used to say that justice and revenge are 2 completely different animals. Revenge is all about inflicting as much pain on the other person as you're feeling. Justice, on the other hand, is about ensuring that what happened doesn't happen to anyone else. For years I wasn't sure which one I was after, and now I think maybe what I really wanted was for Elena to matter, to be remembered as a person, a real human being, not just a statistic someone erased." He offered a sad smile. "You're giving me that, giving all of them that. So, yeah, it's enough." Victoria simply nodded, not trusting her voice at the moment. After a pause, she said, "You should probably stop pretending to be a janitor. We're going to need expert witnesses, people who actually understand the science, who can explain exactly what went wrong. Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to tell Eleanor's story the way it deserves to be told, to people who will actually listen." Victoria managed a weak smile. "Also, Clara Ara would be absolutely devastated if her math tutor suddenly disappeared. She's been working on this proof about prime numbers. Apparently you promised you'd check it." Daniel laughed, and it sounded like something finally breaking open, like years of built-up pressure being released at long last. "Yeah, I did promise that." The news broke 3 days later. Ashford Pharmaceuticals admits to illegal drug trials, 7 confirmed deaths. Federal investigation launched. The headlines were brutal, but Victoria had anticipated that. She'd prepared a statement that didn't minimize or excuse anything, that named the victims, acknowledged their families, promised full cooperation and concrete changes. The lawsuits came in a flood. Relatives of the victims, former employees who'd been fired for daring to ask questions, advocacy groups for the homeless. They all came after Ashford. Margaret and her team were working around the clock, trying to negotiate settlements, coordinating with prosecutors, desperately trying to contain this wildfire of legal action that was consuming everything. The stock price completely collapsed. Two major investors pulled out entirely, taking their money elsewhere. Richard Brennan, the CFO who'd voted against disclosure, was arrested for obstruction of justice. Apparently, he'd known all about the illegal trials and had actively helped to destroy evidence. But in the middle of all this chaos, something completely unexpected happened. Dr. Bennett came to Victoria's office carrying a folder full of emails. "You need to see these. They're coming in by the hundreds, from researchers, doctors, patient advocates, all sorts of people who are saying they're proud of what we did." Victoria quickly flipped through them, absolutely stunned. Messages from medical ethicists praising the voluntary disclosure, notes from cancer patients who had taken Ashford's drugs and who wanted to support the company's commitment to transparency. Emails from young scientists who said they would be honored to work for a pharmaceutical company that chose truth over profits. "There's even one from MIT, Dr. Bennett said, smiling slightly. "They want to partner with us on developing new ethical protocols for clinical trials. They specifically mentioned Dr. Wright's involvement." Victoria thought about Daniel, who was currently giving depositions to federal investigators, who was finally getting to tell Elena's story to people with the power to actually do something about it, who came by the office twice a week to check on Clara Ara's math homework and to tell her stories about his wife, who loved blueberry pancakes. "Forward that to Daniel," Victoria said. "I think he'd appreciate it." The settlement negotiations took months, dragging on and on. The Victims Fund was eventually established with $50 million from the company and personal contributions from various board members. It wasn't enough, could never truly be enough, but it was something real, something that acknowledged the lives of the people who had been erased. Victoria testified before a congressional committee on pharmaceutical ethics. She showed them her father's journal, openly admitted what he'd done, and outlined all the changes Ashford was implementing to ensure this never happened again. Some representatives were hostile, understandably so. Others were surprisingly sympathetic. "What you're doing is rare," one senator told her after the hearing. "Most companies fight accountability until they're absolutely forced to accept it. You chose it. That matters." "I had help," Victoria replied, thinking of a janitor who'd taught her daughter math and her mother courage. The company survived, but just barely. They lost contracts and partnerships and had to sell off entire divisions just to pay for the settlements. But they also gained something unexpected, a reputation for integrity. Other pharmaceutical companies started reaching out, asking about their new protocols. Medical schools invited them to speak about corporate responsibility. They became, oddly enough, a model for what accountability could actually look like in the real world. A year after the initial disclosure, Victoria found herself at a small ceremony at MIT. The university was establishing the Eleanor Wright Memorial Scholarship for Women in Biochemistry. Daniel had been invited to speak, and he had asked Victoria to come along. She stood in the back of the auditorium and listened as he spoke about his wife. Not about her death, but about her life, her passion for science, her unwavering belief that medicine should serve everyone, not just those who could afford it, her kindness and her terrible taste in reality TV shows. The audience laughed in the right places and was quiet in others, listening intently to his words. And when Daniel unveiled the plaque with Elena's name and photograph, Victoria saw several people wiping their eyes. After the ceremony, a young woman approached Daniel shyly. "I'm the first recipient of the scholarship," she said. "I just wanted to say thank you for making sure she's remembered." Daniel's smile was genuine this time, not weighted down with 15 years of grief and regret. "She would have been glad to help you. That's just the kind of person she was." Victoria waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching. Clara Ara was with her, practically bouncing with excitement. She had been working on a complex equation for weeks and was absolutely desperate to show Daniel. "Mr. Daniel, look what I figured out." Clara Ara thrust her notebook at him. "It's about the Fibonacci sequence and how it relates to the golden ratio. Mom helped me research it, but I did all the math myself." Daniel studied the notebook carefully, his expression serious and focused. "This is excellent work, Clara Ara. Your reasoning here is really sophisticated." He pointed to a specific section. "This proof is particularly elegant. Did you come up with this approach yourself?" "Mostly. Mom suggested I think about it geometrically instead of just numerically." Clara beamed at Victoria. "She's been learning math with me. We're kind of studying together now." "Is that right?" Daniel looked at Victoria, eyebrows raised in amusement. Victoria simply shrugged, slightly embarrassed. "I realized I'd been avoiding mathematics because I found it intimidating. Seemed like a bad example to set for my daughter. So I've been relearning alongside her." "She's really good at it," Clara said loyally. "Even when she gets frustrated and says words she tells me not to use." Daniel laughed. "Mathematics has that effect on people." He handed the notebook back to Clara. "Keep working on this." "I think you're on the edge of something interesting." As Clara wandered off to explore the campus, Victoria and Daniel stood together in comfortable silence. Finally, Victoria said, "Thank you for everything, for being patient with me, for giving me the chance to do the right thing." "You gave yourself that chance," Daniel replied. "I just held up a mirror." Still, Eleanor would be proud of the scholarship, of the changes at Ashford, of all of it. "She would be proud of you," Daniel corrected gently, "for choosing your daughter's future over your father's legacy, for understanding that some secrets shouldn't stay hidden, no matter how painful the truth is." Victoria watched Clara examining a sculpture on the MIT campus, her daughter's face bright with curiosity and intelligence. "She wants to be a mathematician when she grows up, maybe a teacher. She says she wants to help other kids understand that math is beautiful, not scary." "She'll be good at it," Daniel smiled. "She already understands the most important thing, that mathematics, like everything else, is about asking the right questions, and sometimes the biggest secrets really do hide in the smallest places." Years later, when Clara was grown and working on her doctorate in mathematics, she would sometimes tell the story of the janitor who taught her calculus when she was 7. People would often be skeptical. 7-year-olds don't learn calculus from janitors. But Clara would insist it was true, and she'd tell them about her mother, who ran a pharmaceutical company and made a choice that cost her everything comfortable to gain something far more important, who proved that courage isn't about not being afraid, but about doing the hard thing anyway, even when you're terrified. But that night at MIT, Clara was still just a 7-year-old girl, excited about numbers and patterns, still young enough to believe that the world was fundamentally fair, that truth always won, that good people always did good things. Victoria wanted to preserve that innocence for as long as possible, but she also wanted Clara to understand that the world was complicated, that people could be good and still do terrible things, that justice was something you had to fight for, not something that just happened on its own. "Come on, honey," Victoria called. "It's getting late. We should head home." Clara Ara ran back to them, full of energy, despite the long day. "Can Mr. Daniel come over for dinner? I want to show him my new geometry set." Daniel glanced at Victoria, checking to see if the invitation was actually okay with her. She nodded. "We'd love to have you." "Nothing fancy, just pasta and whatever conversation Clara Ara decides we need to have." "Then I'd be honored," Daniel said. As they walked to the parking lot together, Clara Ara chattering excitedly about mathematical theorems and about a boy in her class who thought girls couldn't be good at math, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not happiness exactly. Too much had happened for simple happiness. But peace. The sense that she was moving in the right direction, that her choices actually mattered, that her daughter would grow up understanding that truth was always worth fighting for. Daniel caught her eye over Clara Ara's head and smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. 15 years of grief and anger couldn't be erased, not completely. Eleanor was still gone. The other victims were still dead, but their names were recorded now, their stories finally told. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. In the car on the way home, Clara Ara fell asleep in the back seat, her notebook full of equations clutched tightly to her chest. Victoria glanced at her in the rear-view mirror and thought about the future, about the woman her daughter would become, about the lessons she was learning now that would shape her choices later in life. Daniel, following behind in his own car, gave a small wave as they pulled out of the parking lot. A man who'd lost everything and somehow found a way forward, who'd taught a little girl mathematics and her mother courage, who'd shown them both that sometimes the hardest equations to solve were the ones about right and wrong. The city lights blurred past the windows, and Victoria drove carefully through the night, carrying her daughter home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more lawsuits, more questions, more consequences of choosing truth over comfort. But tonight they had peace. They had each other. And they had the knowledge that secrets, no matter how well hidden, eventually find their way into the light. Because the biggest secrets really do hide in the smallest places, and sometimes all it takes is someone brave enough to